I'm with Professor Rafael Fernández de Castro of ITAM in Mexico City, who has important expertise on an issue that is critical for Latin America today, the issue of security in general, of violence in particular. Professor Fernández de Castro, could you comment on the role security and violence are playing in the Americas today?
Of course, thank you for the opportunity to express my experience and what I have learned working for the UNDP, the United Nations Development Program. We're developing a report on citizen security throughout Latin America. And unfortunately, I have to say that Latin America has become the single most violent region in the world. We Latin Americans, we represent around 9% of the world's population, and we concentrate close to 30% of the world's homicide. That can tell you, how violent Latin America has become. And why Latin America has become so violent is not easy to explain. But let me tell you something. In the last few years, Latin America has done very well economically speaking. Most of Latin America didn't suffer much because of the big 2008 crisis, 2009 economic crisis, because we have sound fundamentals. We learned in the 1980s, in the 1990s, and now Latin America economy has done well. Also, in addition to that, places like Brazil, they've been able to reduce poverty in dramatic ways. So Latin America has done well economically and in social justice. But at the same time, violence has increased in Latin America. So why is that? Well, it has to do, I will say, with four related issues. Number one, state capacity. In Latin America, in most countries of Latin America, we don't have judicial institutions. We don't have institutions. We don't have a very important rule of law, and that is affecting Latin America. And basically, in most Latin America, we're lacking good police, good judges, and good prisons. There's been a crisis in the prison system in Latin America in the last 3 or 4 years. So that's a big problem. So we haven't been able to contain organized crime and to contain other threats that are coming to Latin America. Second, I will say we have a structural problem. Latin America continues to be the single most unequal region in the world. The gap between the rich and the poor is largest in Latin America. Every country in the world, Cuba, the US, Russia, they having problems in this income disparity, but no place, no region in the world like Latin America. So that's the second issue. The third issue, we'll say, is, we don't have anymore this sort of society controls and individual controls, because the family used to be very important in Latin America, and now, unfortunately, we're having a lot of households with single parents, single mothers. Now the single mother is working, so the children are out there. So the family is not the same lately like in the past. We have problems with religion, and we have problems with the school. Moreover, we're also been having a tremendous growth of middle classes. And unfortunately, the new Latin American middle classes, they want to consume as if they were wealthy, as if they were rich. And unfortunately, they cannot get the consumption level that they aiming to. And sometimes these individuals, they become corrupted, and they are working in any place, but they are also doing some illegal stuff, and that is affecting Latin America a lot. And fourth has to do, the fourth variable and the fourth explanation has to do, I would say, with drivers. There's three main drivers in Latin America that explains a lot of violence. Number one is drugs. Unfortunately, drugs nowadays are consuming Latin America. Latin America is not only a transit or a producing place for drugs, but now we're consuming drugs, and that is a driver of violence. Number two, alcohol. Young Latin Americans, they drinking a lot, and alcohol is associated with a lot of fights and with a lot of car accidents. And it's in Latin America, unfortunately, because we have a rule of law. It's very easy to be 16-year-old. You have to be 18, not like in the US that you have to be 21. Here, when you vote, you can drink. But unfortunately, you're going to see these 15 years old, 14 years old drinking. And I will say the culture of drinking in Latin America, it's creating a lot of problems, and there's very few restrictions. And finally, it's about arms. There's a lot of guns in Latin America, of course, a lot of guns in Mexico, a lot of guns in Central America, a lot of guns in Brazil, even though Brazil passed a law in 2005 of gun control. They continue to have a lot of guns. So this could explain you a little bit why we Latin Americans have become so violent. And this has become the single most important obstacle for human development and for Latin American well-being. To me, violence and public insecurity has become a sort of external debt problem of the 1970s and 1980s, which has become a huge obstacle for Latin American development. So now this is the very important challenge we're facing, and I will say that we have to try to overcome that challenge with a lot of international coordination and with a lot, I would say, of imagination, because this is a very complex problem. And if you don't mind, I will stop here.